This is going to be a fun class because we all like stories, and I love stories. And we're going to be looking at the stories that Jesus tells during his travel narrative in Luke. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Let me get started with a story. When I was a youth pastor in the first church I served in Eugene, Oregon, Grace Lutheran Church, they just celebrated their 100th anniversary. And when I was there in the 1970s, we would take youth groups to this wonderful lighthouse over by Florence on the coast. And Steve knows this area. And so we had 4 vans, eight kids to a van. And we had the weekend together at the lighthouse. And we were on our way home, and I was the last van, and the other vans got ahead of us, which is not a good thing. It was dark. It was February, rainy, cold. And sure enough, the van broke down. We had rented all 4 vans, and they were all really old vans. So my van broke down, so I'm in the middle of the coastal range of mountains, and there's the closest gas station is 30 miles away, probably. So I'm there with these 8 kids, and the first thing we did was pray, which was a good thing. And then the second thing we did, I told the kids, stay in the vehicle, and I'm going to get out, and I'm going to stand on the side of the road. I'm just going to put my hand out, hope that somebody stops. I was out there for about 20 minutes, and nobody came. This was fairly late at night. It was like 9 o'clock. And sure enough, I see some headlights coming, and they're getting closer and closer. I put my thumb out, and they pulled right out in front of us on the side of the road. Who's in the van? This was also a van. It's 2 firemen from Eugene that had been attending a conference in Florence, and they were on their way home. And whatever part it was some vital part because that van would not start. They happened to have that part in their van, flipped the hood open, fixed the van, and I asked for their names, and they both had cards. They gave me their cards. We sent them a letter. All the kids signed it and everything. But what are the odds of that happening? And it was they could have driven right by, which is what most people would have done, I think, but these guys didn't. And I'll always remember that as sort of my good Sam story in terms of people being there when you need them and taking the time to take care of others. So that's a story. It's one of my stories. We're hoping that a part of this class is when you go to your small groups, you'll be able to tell some of your stories that fit with the story that we're doing in the class. So let's talk about stories first of all. Where are we? There we are. I guess I'll look over there. Stories and witness. The Bible is stories within the story. So when you read a story in the Bible, arcing over that story is the great story of our salvation history, right? So it's always the story in a bigger story that we're reading. It's like my story of the Coastal Range Road is a story within my life story arcing over that, and over my life story is the story of Jesus arcing over that. So the stories in the Bible are always stories within a greater story. We also should mention when we're talking about stories, oral tradition, because it's so important. You realize that the stories you have in both the Old and the New Testament were told orally before they were written down. So that the New Testament, for instance, the stories about Jesus were just told by word of mouth. Now, how did they get stereotyped? That's a fancy word for how did they get it right? How could they tell the stories and still get the details of the stories right for all those years before it's written down? How did that happen? They had eyewitnesses. There were people there who were a part of the story, actually saw it with their own eyes. So if somebody said, well, I remember when Jesus not only walked across the water, he ran across the water. And there's somebody who saw that and said, no, he never ran across the water. He walked across the water. So there are eyewitnesses there who could correct the story, and it gets stereotyped to where it's very accurate. We trust those stories. So that the stories get written down by 90, 95 A.D., the last of the stories are written. John's gospel is written down. But it's not until really the 4th century that these stories get accepted as the written canon, the written books of the inspired scriptures. 4th century that happens. The Old Testament stories were written down over the course of time, and by 90 A.D., a bunch of Jewish rabbis get together at the Council of Jamnia, and they say this is the Old Testament Hebrew Scriptures. And now the oral tradition becomes the written, inspired Word of God. And that's how we get our Bible. So we're going to talk about, in this class, the value of informal conversational language. The language that we use when we're just with folks, not theological jargon. I spent a lot of my time with systematic theologians. Not anymore. I'm glad I don't have those guys around me very much, but big nouns, omnipresence and eschatological. It's not a noun. Eschatology. That's theological jargon. Jesus did not use theological jargon. He used conversational language. And in the Greek, if you read the New Testament in Greek, guess what that language is? It's Koine Greek. An 8-year-old could read that Greek. It's that level of conversation in the New Testament. So that it's not the highfalutin classical Greek, Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey and all that. It's just basic conversational Koine, common Greek. And that's the kind of language that Jesus uses. And it's the best language for witness because it's the language that we use every day with the people around us. But also, if you come at people too directly with theological jargon, it's a turnoff. So Gene Peterson, in his book Telling It Slant, has this wonderful poem from Emily Dickinson. Remember her? Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. So the stuff of our stories is so significant and in some sense so heavy that we need stories to be able to communicate it. It's stories that work with the biblical material. And that's what Jesus did. He told stories. He told it slant. He didn't hit them directly with all the powerful theology that's there and present in the scriptures. He hit them with stories and conversational stories. He told it slant. So, I want to talk a little bit about the narrative platform. I almost said platform. This is how stories run. This is how a story is built. And it's helpful to know this. I owe this to Gene Lowry, who wrote a book called The Narrative Platform. So the story begins with something that's upsetting the equilibrium. And there's an oops to it. His students he was a homiletician. He taught this to future pastors. So it begins by something's upset. Maybe, you know what I'll do? I'll use a film for this. Boy, I'm going to date myself with this. The film with Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly, High Noon. One of the best films ever produced. Now you know how old I am. Okay, 1952. All right, so the oops, the upsetting of the equilibrium in that story is that the marshal of the town had sent 3 criminals to jail, and now they were coming back to get him. And he has just met the love of his life, and he decides, I'm going to go with my wife and leave this town, and we're going to have a wonderful life together. So that's the oops. He's leaving, and these 3 criminals are going to come, and they're going to do damage to the town. That's the oops. There's even more oops there, because at one point, he's thinking, she'll never really respect me for what I did. I left those townspeople there defenseless. So that's the ugh. You go deeper into the discrepancy that's there in the story. It goes deeper and deeper. And so the disclosing of the clue to resolution comes when he turns around and decides to go back. High noon was when they were going to come to town and kill him. So he gets there a little past high noon, but he's made the turn back to town. That's disclosing the clue to resolution. Something's happening here now that there's a reversal, all right? So what he does is he manages to take out 2 of the criminals, but there's 1 left. And that 3rd criminal gets the jump on him. I hope I'm remembering this right. And he's ready to shoot him, and all of a sudden you watch that 3rd criminal, that 3rd outlaw, fall down. Who shot the 3rd criminal? Anybody remember? His wife, the pacifist. She was a pacifist. She took the third criminal out. And so we experienced the resolution of this with that another reversal where in place of him shooting, he couldn't shoot the third criminal. She shoots the third outlaw. And as they settle everything and the town goes back to normal, we watch them ride off into the sunset. And it says not the end, but the beginning. All right? And that's anticipating the consequences. They're going to have a great life together. That's the yeah. So, oops to ugh, it goes deeper. The aha, the we, celebrating what's happening as you experience the resolution and ultimately anticipating the consequences. All right. So, stories then are great for conversational witness. And this is what I'd like you to take from the course, is that you have stories in your history that are crucial in terms of your being able to witness to others. You haven't tapped those stories, but they're there. I hadn't thought about that trip with the youth group for a long time, but there it was suddenly. My phone keeps beeping, so I'm going to just turn it off. Sorry about this. There we go. All right. So hopefully we'll get to your stories throughout the course, and they'll parallel the stories we look at together. All right. Let's talk about the context for these stories. It's Luke's travel narrative. It's the centerpiece of Luke's gospel. It begins when the days drew near for him to be taken up. He set his face like a flint. He set his face like a stone, another version says, to go to Jerusalem. All right, so notice that when the days drew near for him to be taken up, what do you think that means? Yeah, ascended, just what you'd think it would be. The ascension into heaven. In German, Himmelfahrtstag. I always laugh when I say it. Himmelfahrtstag. The going to heaven day, ascension day. He was looking forward to going to heaven. And he set his face to Jerusalem. And it ends up in Luke 19, the last part of the book, or this part of the gospel goes, and when he had said these things, when he had told these stories, he went on ahead going up to Jerusalem. And so these are the stories that Jesus tells between coming from Galilee in the north and traveling with his disciples through Samaria and down into Judea and Jerusalem. So there's stories told along the way. While he's traveling with them, he's telling these stories, not just to him, but others that others that he encounters along the way. So what happens with Luke 19:28 is that he sends two disciples to get a donkey. So what's next? He's going to ride into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and the rest of the gospel is Holy Week. So that's the context for these stories. Jesus is on the go with his disciples. It's stories that are between the synagogue in Capernaum, where he left, and the temple in Jerusalem. Again, Gene Peterson suggests that these are stories told between Sundays for Christians. Between your worship on Sundays, these are the stories we tell each other in witness between Sundays. All right. It's a confusing itinerary because it seems like he gets to Jerusalem more than just at the end of the travel narrative. It seems like he gets to Jerusalem 2 or 3 times along the way. But it doesn't change the fact that he set his face to be lifted up and to go to Jerusalem. All right. Slanted everyday stories without theological language. That's a great picture of what this must have been like, Jesus traveling with his disciples. All right, let's frame the story. As Jesus begins his trip through Samaria, the first thing that happens is a Samaritan village rejects him. And so, remember James and John, I think I might have mentioned this Sunday in the sermon. James and John suggest that Jesus nuke that village. We don't know which village it is, but call down fire from heaven and nuke it. So they're rebuked for that. He sees some defections of followers that say, let me first go and bury my father, let me first go home and say goodbye to my family, and they don't follow him. He sends out those 72 new disciples in pairs, receives their report back. Even the demons obey us, and they're all happy and giddy and joyful over the power they have over the demons. He curses 3 towns in Galilee, Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. We were just in a parking lot in Galilee, and there's a sign that says, supposed site of Chorazin. And I just love that. It's just a sign. There's nothing there. So he curses those cities, and they're gone. Oh, they're gone. But especially Chorazin, they're not even sure where it is. It's been obliterated. And then the parable is immediately framed by 2 rounds of debate between Jesus and a lawyer. So the thing to notice about, before we get to the parable of the Good Samaritan, or I like to call it the parable of the neighbor, a lawyer stands up to put Jesus to the test. Now that word in Greek means not only test, but to test intently and even to tempt. So it's the same word that's used for when Jesus says to Satan out in the desert, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. That's the word that's used here for the testing. So he's putting Jesus to the test. What shall I do to inherit eternal life? Now what does Jesus do? He answers a question with what? With a question. What is written in the law? How do you read it? He answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, desiring to get a compliment probably from the rabbi, desiring to get an answer from the rabbi that says, who's my neighbor? Well, your neighbor is your own people. The Jews that you love are your neighbor. So that's why he's trying to justify himself as much as he can. So round 1 of the framing of the story. What shall I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? How do you read it? Love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself. Do this, and you will live. That's James Tizot's illustration of the scribe who stands to test Jesus. The word that's used for the scribe is lawyer, but he was really an expert on biblical law. He really knew the text of the scriptures. So probably a scribe is a good way to... And notice he stands. Some people think that's rude, that he would stand. Is he trying to do a power play over Jesus? No, that's what a student did to show respect for his professor. In these days, rabbis, teachers, sat when they taught. So Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, sits and teaches as he sits. It's kind of like being enthroned. I wish professors today could just sit and teach and not have to stand and perform for everybody. So he stands and tests Jesus. And that's round 1. And then round 2, who is my neighbor? Jesus tells a story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, so forth. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? The one who showed him mercy. You go and do likewise. Go and do. All right. So on your outline, I've got the story in 7 scenes, okay? And it's on a chart, the same chart that's up on the screen there. It's interesting to look at the language that's used, that it gets repeated, come, do, go, come, do, go, come, do, go. For the robbers, the priest, and the Levite, they come and do different things, but come, do, go. So let's go through each of the 7 scenes. How much time do I have? 7:30? 7:30? Good. Okay. Make sure. All right. So let's take the first scene, which, if you want to put a title next to it, it would be The Robbers. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. So this story happens on the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. And this is a dangerous road. It's through mountainous country, lots of caves, a place where robbers just love to attack travelers. A 17-mile stretch between Jerusalem and Jericho. We'll see in just a minute that we're pretty sure they're going from Jerusalem to Jericho. So they're moving from west to east, okay, toward the Jordan River. All right. The victim is anonymous. Notice he's stripped. He has no identifying language. He has no clothing to say, oh, he's from this part of Palestine or this part of Israel. There were distinguishing clothing, but he's been stripped bare. And he's not conversational because he's probably unconscious. So there's no way to identify this man that's been attacked by robbers. And he's left half dead. The rabbis had 2 warnings for people in Jesus' day about people who are wounded. The half dead means they're almost dead. The dead means they're dead. And either way, you didn't go near a dead body. It would defile you to go near a dead body. You have to know that to understand why this priest passes by. Okay? So the fact that the man's left half dead, which means he's not moving, and for all the priest or the Levite know, he's dead. And they're not going to come within 3 cubits of a dead person. All right, so that's the first thing. Now let's go to the second scene. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and notice down that road, down from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is always up, down from Jerusalem, down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So he does not go near the man. He gets as far away from the man as he possibly can. So likely this priest lived in Jericho and had just served his 2 weeks with his priestly team, a priest, a Levite, and a layperson, who spent 2 weeks leading worship, offering sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem, and now the priest is on his way home. Likely, this is a surprise for some people, he has his own horse or donkey. Why? Because priests were seen as very wealthy. They were well compensated, just like today. Look at that, Steve. Okay, so the priest then probably has a horse, and that makes a difference. The Levite would not have had a horse. So if the Levite's going to do anything with this guy that's laying on the road, he's going to have to do it himself without the benefit of a horse or a donkey. But the priest has probably a horse, but possibly a donkey. Again, he's going down the road. But notice if you look at all 3 of these, I just noticed this afternoon. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road. Look at the Levite. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place. So the priest just keeps going, right? The Levite actually comes near the man who's half dead. He comes to the place and then passes by on the other side. He takes a look, in other words. But the Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where the wounded man was. And when he saw him, he had compassion. So you can just sense the willingness to get close to the situation. All right. So many people think that the priest walks by because he's torn between 2 rabbinic traditions that were both respected. The one from Sirach says, do not go to the help of a sinner. So if the person that's there is a sinner, to help that sinner who might be wounded or hurt would be, in effect, to go against God, because God hates sinners. That's what the rabbis taught. That was one tradition. The other tradition, though, said, if a man sees his fellow drowning, mauled by beast, or attacked by robbers, this is a quote, he is bound to save him. So imagine this priest, all this rabbinic law going through his head, and torn between, this is Samaria, and do I really want to even have a problem with this guy? All right. Defilement would ruin his ability to serve as a priest. In other words, if he defiled himself by touching or being close to a dead person, there'd be 2 major sources of defilement: contact with the dead, and he didn't know what nationality this person was. What if he was a Samaritan? What if he was a non-Jew? Those were the 2 worst defilements the rabbis taught. Contact with a dead person, contact with a Gentile. All right. So the Lord says to Moses, the Lord said unto Moses, speak with the priests the sons of Aaron, and say unto them, there shall none be defiled for the dead among his people. That's Leviticus 21:1. So if a priest came within 3 or 4 cubits of a dead person, he would be defiled. What did that mean? He was no longer able to serve as a priest without getting cleansed. And the cleansing for a priest who was defiled could take a full week and included the sacrifice of a full heifer, which is very expensive. But publicly, you were shamed when you were a defiled priest. So I'm not trying to make excuses for this priest, but he had a lot of reasons not to stop as he walks by on the other side. So for him, maintaining his cleanliness, his purity as a servant of God, was more important than reaching out to the one who was wounded on the road. It's a very calculated ethic. All right, let's look at the Levite. Don't know a lot about the Levite. When he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. It's likely that this Levite also is going home to Jericho after serving 2 weeks in the temple in Jerusalem. Note that the robbers, the priest, and the Levite have the same pattern of their behavior. They come, they do something, pass by on the other side basically, and they go. It's interesting to see that unfold. Likely the Levite knows that the priest is on the road ahead of him. How would he know that? Well, it could have been somebody coming toward him that says, there's a priest up ahead. Or he could have even seen the priest ahead of him. It was common to check with those passing by, and he could see far ahead of him. So he knows the priest is there. He perhaps has even seen the priest walk by on the other side. And for him to stop would be an insult to the priest. If the priest didn't stop, the priest had a good reason for not stopping. So the Levite, my guess is, did not stop, lest he somehow counter the wisdom and the ethics of a priest. And also, he had no animal with him. He would not have had his own beast. All right. This brings us to the Samaritan. Rah, rah, rah. The audience likely expected the next character to be a Jewish layperson because these priestly teams worked in threes. You had the priest and a Levite and a leading layperson. And they're all three from Jericho, probably on their way home. So instead of this being a layperson, it ends up being the Good Samaritan or the neighbor. So Samaritans were hated by Jews. Here's the wisdom of Ben Sirach, a rabbi from 200 BC. There are 2 nations that my soul detests. The third is not a nation at all. The inhabitants of Mount Seir and the Philistines and the stupid people living at Shechem. Those are the Samaritans. So if you walked by a Samaritan, you kept your distance, or you maybe even spit at him. The prejudice was deep, and it went way back to the time when the exiles came back and were rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and the temple, and the Samaritans tried to stop them from doing that. Also, they were seen as half-breeds, and also they worshipped at another temple, another worship place in Gerizim. Remember the woman at the well that Jesus talks to? So there were many reasons that the Jews had, in their mind at least, to hate the Samaritans. So in John 8:48, it's interesting, the Jews taunt Jesus with this. Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? So those things were put together, being a Samaritan and having a demon, and they charged Jesus with both of those. So Samaritans were publicly cursed in Jewish synagogues. As I said, they worshipped at Mount Gerizim, and it hindered the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem after the exile. So, notice that it says, but a Samaritan as he journeyed came to where he was. He came to right where he was. And when he saw him, he didn't pass by on the other side. He had compassion. The word for compassion, this is one of the Greek words you have to know. Splanchnidzomai. Splanchnizomai. Your splanchna are down here in your gut. Your gut is your splanchna. So when you had compassion, you were moved in your gut. There was a sensation of deep emotion toward the person. When Jesus looked at the crowds, remember, he had compassion on them. When he fed the 5,000, he had compassion on them. This is said about Jesus several times in both Matthew and Luke. This splanchna, the movement of feeling. So your emotions were not seen as your heart. Your emotions were down here in your bowels or your intestines. That presents a whole strange image for Valentine's Day, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. All right. So his compassion overcomes the risk of being attacked by robbers himself because he stops. So he's a target. Who knows, the robbers are still around, but he is now stopped and is going to minister to the man. And as he stops and begins to help the man, he now associates himself with the man and risks what's called technically retaliation by the man's family if he should be seen with the man who's wounded. Did you do this to our family member? So that was a big risk because the law of retaliation was really in play at this time. So, next scene. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. What beautiful language. He bound up his wounds. He put bandages on his wounds. He poured on the necessary oil and wine which he had with him. The language used for the prophets for God's acts of salvation. I will restore health to you and bind up your wounds. I will heal you. That's God speaking in Jeremiah. So also wine and oil were used in the sacrifices in the temple. Remember, Paul talks about his life being poured out like a libation, like a sacrificial offering, and the oil as well used there. So he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. This is the point at which in the story the early church leaders and preachers saw the story as allegorical, that the Good Samaritan is actually Jesus. There's a poem there's a sermon by Augustine that takes every figure in the story and makes it allegorical. So the Good Sam is the Christ figure. The robbers are the devil and evil angels. The priest and the Levite is the whole system of Old Testament worship, Augustine said. The inn is the church. He even goes so far as to say the innkeeper, we're not even told there was an innkeeper, it's almost like the Christmas story, is St. Paul. And when the Good Sam says, when I come back, it's Jesus talking about his resurrection, that he'll come back. So it's an interesting sermon to read, but it's so allegorical. But you can't help but think of Christ when you see this going on. I couldn't help but think of Christ when those two firefighters stopped with their, whatever the part was that they had. Wow. Yeah. All right. So then he set him on his own animal. There's the animal that we've been waiting to meet, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. So this is really going the extra mile. When it says his own animal, I'm interested, were there other animals there? Did he have an entourage? Was he a really wealthy Samaritan? Maybe. Some of the medieval paintings present the Good Samaritan as very wealthy. He has a big turban and has a whole bunch of horses. But he puts the wounded man on his animal, on his own animal. And there's probably, if it's a horse, they both could have ridden, but there's something wonderful if he actually led the horse the rest of the way, you know what I mean? And was willing to take that horse and lead it and just have the man by himself. That's a reversal, especially in this culture. that was unheard of for a wealthy man to give up his ride on his horse for another person. We often miss that, I think, in the story. The inn is likely not on the road. There were no inns on the road for that 17-mile stretch. It's probably in Jericho. They're probably close to home. He stays overnight with the wounded man. Again, he's risking retaliation by staying overnight with him. Kenneth Bailey, you're looking at him on Sunday mornings in your Bible study here, writes that this is like a Plains Indian in 1875 riding into Dodge City with a scalped cowboy on his horse, checking into a saloon and staying the night to take care of him. He'll be fortunate to get out of town alive. That's what this was like for the Good Samaritan to actually stay overnight in the inn to make sure the man was taken care of. And then the final payment, the man had no money, could have been imprisoned for debt or even killed by the innkeepers. Innkeepers were nasty people in those days. If you didn't pay your bill, you might not get out alive. So generosity, extravagant grace, more than expected. And the next day he took out 2 denarii, 2 days' wages, and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him. Whatever more you spend, I promise I'll be back to repay you. All right, so that's the story in 7 scenes. Let's look at a little art. Rembrandt gets this right in terms of the horse and the man lifting him off his horse. The Good Sam lifting him off the horse. Better there. All right. Another Rembrandt painting, the Good Samaritan etching. Again, lifting the man off the horse to bring him into the inn. Not sure what that dog is doing down below. Do you ever get distracted in paintings and wonder, was he practicing that particular thing or what? Somebody might know. Bassano is an amazing artist whose colors are always so graphic and rich. Here he is binding the man's wounds. The dogs are licking his blood. He's at the place. He's there doing the Good Samaritan thing. I love that painting. Eugene Delacroix, known for his colors especially, and almost cartoon-like colors that just look out at you, lifting the man off the horse again, which seemed to be a favorite posture depicted by artists on this story. And this is Van Gogh's The Good Samaritan after Delacroix. So he used this as his inspiration for what I think is the most beautiful Good Samaritan painting. And you can watch both the priest and the Levite walking off. You see on the left, walking off, leaving him behind, and his empty treasure box and so forth. Vincent van Gogh, as you know, was suffering from depression through a lot of his adult life, and was actually in a care facility for many of the last years of his life. But he grew up a Christian. His father was a missionary, and he wanted to be a missionary. And he studied theology and wrote some amazing sermons. You can read his sermons. They've been translated into English. Just go online. Just amazing to see what Van Gogh came up with in terms of, and you know, big surprise, his sermons are rich with images. It's like he was using PowerPoint. He's always painting pictures with words, and very down to earth, common. He worked with the miners in his hometown for a while. Gustave Le Roux 1851. Again, the Good Sam leading him with his own donkey. This one is haunting. Doesn't it look like a photograph? It isn't. It's a painting. Moreau's The Good Samaritan, 1880. Around the same time as Van Gogh. There's something haunting about that, isn't it? I mean, just the care that's there as he holds the man up. What's that?
So alive.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right, not to be missed in this story. Religious traditions and fear stopped both the priest and the Levite from stopping to help the wounded man. The Samaritan is explained by his compassion. There's the word that I was giving you, splanchnizomai. Just splankna down here. He's moved deeply with compassion. The way Jesus was moved by two blind people. The way Jesus was moved when he fed 5,000 people plus. The Samaritan went beyond what was expected of him, endangering his own life and family if they believed that he was somehow responsible for the man's wounds. So let's talk a little bit about hero depiction. Now, this is homiletics language. Hero depiction means who's in our culture right now that really needs to hear the Good Samaritan story? Who's in your culture, your circle of relationships that needs you to tell the Good Samaritan story? You see, that's what we call in preaching hero depiction. So when I sit down and take my legal pad and begin to sketch out a sermon, I always sketch out the people who need to hear this Bible text today. What's going on in them, and why do they need to hear this particular text? Well, it should be the same with us in our personal witness, that we're looking for people out there for whom this story would be very significant, or a story like it. So those who separate their religion from life, who somehow have managed to keep this tremendous God with deep compassion for us, this Savior who had such compassion for us, he went to the cross, to somehow not transfer that compassion to their own lives, that they separate their faith story with the story of their own lives. So some people today have compassion immunity. So you can show them a violent picture, and I'm sorry, I've seen lots of those. So what maybe 30 years ago used to just shock us, take that down. Why would you put that up? Now we can just look at it, because there's been so much violence in our culture and so many video games that are violent with our young people. Even at the age of 8 or 9, they're looking at blowing people up. The compassion immunity, you can't get to the splankna anymore. That's an issue. Or fatigue, compassion fatigue. Some people are just tired. First responders are tired of responding to need. So they may not ooze with compassion. I couldn't help but think of Bonhoeffer with his vicarious representative action, Stellvertretung in German. This means that I am willing to enter into the life of another person. I'm actually willing to enter their story in an active way on behalf of Christ. So I become Christ to that person in need. Now, we often use the reversal of that we feed the hungry person because Christ says, you fed me when I was hungry, Matthew 25. But Bonhoeffer suggested that in Christians, there's this desire to be Christ to the neighbor. And he calls that, the English, vicarious representative action. I represent Christ, and in his place, I enter the hurt of another person. It's a beautiful concept that Bonhoeffer gives us. Those who harbor racial and ethnic prejudice, that's definitely a part of this story. So it may not even be racial prejudice against African Americans. It can be racial prejudice against Asians. But the racial prejudice that is still present somewhere deep in our hearts that maybe we thought was gone, we suddenly encounter it again. I think we've come a long way with that. I grew up in an extended family in Chicago that hated black people. that hated African Americans and used every pejorative term for African Americans you can think of. Not my immediate family, but my extended family. And I grew up with that. And then God gave me a friend in high school, Kittrell Moore, who became an LCMS pastor. And we ended up being great friends. We went to Ann Arbor together. We went to senior college together. We went to seminary together. And that friendship broke me loose from all of that baggage that I was carrying. But racial prejudice is still around. And settle for surrogate help from a distance, so that in our lives, even though we might be presented with somebody on the side of the road with their thumb out with a van full of kids, somebody else will take care of that. I'll defer. Or we let others do the hard work of helping out. So those are people who really need to hear this story. And you may know some people who fit into those categories. So finally, in terms of what we take with us as we go on the road with Jesus, events create neighbors. That if I'm out in the world, if there are events in my life out there, I'm going to have neighbors. And they're created by the events of one's life. People that I never thought would become a neighbor, become neighbors for me. Events create neighbors. Compassion can trump both fear and prejudice. Compassion is a stronger emotion than fear and prejudice. At least it was in the neighbor who is a neighbor to the wounded man. Grace can be extravagant and costly. And finally, Jesus says, go and do likewise. That's how the story ends. Go and do this. What you just saw, what you heard in this story, do that. Do the same thing. Be a neighbor. Do neighborly things. Show love toward the neighbor, Jesus says. So that gives us a sense of how the Christian faith is not just felt, but done. Love is a verb. I haven't really loved unless I've done something. It's more than an emotion. All right, I think we're just about at break time, or time for you to go to your discussion groups. In these conversation groups, you're challenged to tell some stories. Let's keep the story thing going. And I'm most interested in stories that relate to this story from you. I shared mine with you. But also stories that you can maybe think about rolling into your travel narrative. You know, you're walking with Jesus through your life, that this is a story others need to hear. So you have a good conversation. See you in a little